Good evening. Mayor Harrington will not be with us tonight, so I call to order the Laramie City Council work session for Tuesday, July 11, 2023 at 6 p.m. First, I'd like to ask if there are any public comments on non-agenda items. Either raise your hand if you're on Zoom, or please come to the podium if you're here with us tonight. Seeing none, I will turn it over to Chief Brown to begin the work session.
Good evening. You guys have heard from me for the past several weeks, so tonight I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and you're actually going to hear from an expert in this field. So I would like to start by introducing former Sergeant Bob Austin. He retired as a sergeant a few months ago. I believe it was in January. Bob, does that sound about right? And he's been working as a community service officer ever since. So Bob and his partner Dan Craney are our primary parking enforcement officers in the city. What I would like to emphasize is that our parking enforcement program is a deterrent. We don't want community members or people coming from the outside of our community parking illegally anywhere in our city, and these individuals make sure that they're complying with the ordinances that you've approved and set forth. So with that, I'm going to let Bob come up here, introduce himself, and talk about some parking issues, some statistics, and what we're seeing here in the city of Laramie. So thank you.
Evening.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming and let me talk to you guys tonight. The chief made a little bit of presentation tonight, and we put it on a PowerPoint. So I don't know if that can go forward one. Thank you. So I'm going to start at the top just to kind of ease you guys into what exactly I do and Officer Craney does. Our primary goal, or our primary core responsibility with the police department, is parking enforcement. And you might ask yourself, well, what is that? It's the thing that you guys constantly get complaints about. I imagine it's probably your number one thing that you guys get complaints on. For me, it's general parking. Typically, as residential parking, we get a lot of residential permit parking complaints. Those are specifically around the university, anywhere from Garfield to Bradley, 10th, 11th. The streets are well known to me and Craney. Abandoned vehicles are another one that are a real jab in the side. We've been working really hard as of late to kind of get some of those issues more under control, since getting some direction from the city prosecutor, Holly Austin Blasky. Misdemeanor investigations such as like graffiti, found property, vandalisms, these type of crimes where there's no suspects. I'm going to jump over community engagement. I'll come back to it. Found property, big one, bikes. I mean, I know you guys have probably seen bikes cabled to everything around town. We try to pick those up and get them back to the owner. If they're not, then it goes through forfeiture process, and typically those bikes are forfeited out to the ARC Regional Services at the end of the year, where they have went for years that I've been at the police department. Traffic accident reports and investigations. We investigate non-injury and injury crashes where there's no fatalities involved. So if it's basic crashes, then we show up to help with the scene, help investigate, and help the people that are involved. And the final thing that we've been working with Upper Command, specifically with Chief Brown, is community engagement. And community engagement's really come on strong as of late, with the chief and my lieutenant receiving emails from citizens around town because they've seen us more out and about, because there's another CSO, which is just me, as opposed to just Dan Craney from July until the end of the year in January when I came on and I switched over. Those come to him, like I said, via emails or through letters. Also, we've had people actually flag us down and speak with us about that. We're trying to address those things in a more personable manner by actually reaching out when we can to go and contact those citizens face-to-face and see if we can help resolve those issues. If you go to the next slide where it talks about calls for service, so if you'll notice 21 and 22, 22 was an up year with parking and permit parking, and I'm going to jump to that. We started to see more past COVID, so people were starting to run around more. In 23, we've seen that the calls are actually down just a little bit, specifically in the area of parking and permit parking. Abandoned vehicles are way up, as I stated before, because we have some new direction from my chief and my assistant chief on how we can address these problem vehicles. The permit parking is down because there's now 2 of us, so we're more engaged with actively patrolling for the residential permit parking areas. And the parking calls, they're probably on par to be about what they were last year. Go to the next slide. Chief Brown put overview map, and the yellow and the red zones are how the calls are condensed in the city of Laramie, where we're typically seeing violations year to date for calls for service related to parking. And that's all aspects of parking: residential permit parking, general parking, block driveways, yellow zones, different calls that the community would call into us. The next slide actually breaks it down even a little bit more, and it breaks it down by calls and where those calls came from. If you look around the campus, specifically to the north, that 30 and that 69 that are on 10th and 11th Street, those are 2 areas where we actively have residents that are pretty engaged with that residential permit parking and those signs. There are also areas where we have identified a high problem with students and other people parking in those specific areas. And I think that relates to that it's a short distance. It's not too far from all the new buildings that they've built, classroom, et cetera, right there off the University of Wyoming on the north side.
Can I jump in here? Is that where we also have some abandoned, empty homes? If I were kind of on 10th and 11th, is that same area? You probably know the neighborhood better than I do, but.
So the University of Wyoming has been actively pursuing their expansion, and I think we all understand as Laramie residents that if you're not growing, you're dying. And so, I mean, I would commend the University of Wyoming for doing that. And as they buy these houses, they're very quickly demoing them and tearing them down. Where we're seeing the problem is sometimes they create havoc for us at the police department, specifically my position, because they'll buy houses where a residential permit parking is located. They'll demo the house. The signs are still up, so the construction guys get in their mind, well, we'll just take this sign down, which confuses everybody. The people that are in the rest of that block that still live there, that the University of Wyoming doesn't own those houses, they get angry. They start calling in to dispatch, the city manager's office, my chief, et cetera, because we aren't enforcing them. So then we got to go back to the streets departments, have them repost the signs, because they're not, basically they've destroyed those parking zones because they're not enforceable, because they've taken a sign down, and you can't enforce just sections of it. It has to be fully posted, or the municipal court judge has already been very clear on her direction that she'll dismiss them. So it's been a constant battle for us in that regards. An example that I would give, if you're ever over on the north side of campus, if you drive down Flint Street right there in the 1100 block, you'll notice that the house is gone right there on the corner, and there's a residential permit parking sign laying right there on the dirt under the pine tree on the corner.
And it's their construction, the demolition company that, sorry. It's the demolition company that they hire that's removing these, you think?
I believe that. I don't want to accuse somebody falsely when I haven't actually seen who's tearing it down. But if I had to strongly speculate in that direction, I would say that's correct.
Right, okay, thanks.
Okay, if we go to the next slide. These are just some of the statistics that we had from 2023 to present. In 2021, we had 2,193 citations. In 2021, that jumped to 2,653, which is actually a credit to CSO Cranny, because he was the sole CSO from basically June 1st to January 6th when I came over. And so patrol was trying to fill in with him on the parking complaints, which I'm sure city council during that time frame got a lot more complaints because there was only him trying to hold the tide of the ocean back, as I would describe it. Since 2023, since I've been on in January to date, we've written over 3,000 parking tickets, and I would probably estimate that that'll be somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000 by the end of this year. Because since these statistics were pulled, we have continued to write parking tickets. So the violations are there, and we're trying to, engage these people, not just by, going out there and crushing everybody's spirits by writing citations, and I understand sometimes paper corrects behavior, but it isn't always necessarily something that needs to be done. And an example I would give you is during Easter weekend, the Newman Center had a Easter service, unbeknownst to me. And I went over on 18th Street and Garfield Street, and it's all marked residential permit right there. And I see all these cars parked in there. So I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? 6 to 6, Monday through Friday. They're not, no holidays, no weekends. I start writing parking citations, and I'm writing parking citations, and more people are coming, and I'm writing parking citations. And I'm thinking, this is not normal. So finally, curiosity gets me, and I asked this gentleman that's walking towards the Newman Center what's going on, and he told me, oh, they're having early Easter Mass. So I just felt like I earned a hell point right there because I was writing all of these parking citations, these poor people that were just trying to go to Easter Mass. So in the end, what I did was I let my Chief Brown know, and I got a hold of this assistant city prosecutor, Austin Belaschke, and I explained the circumstance and these 13 tickets that I had written, because my salvation was one of the ladies that lived on Garfield Street came out and said, oh, please, 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 I'll give you all my temporary parking permits. And I said, would you please give me these temporary parking permits? And she was nice enough to come out, and she put her temporary parking permits on all those cars. And I know that's kind of some gray area with the way that the ordinance is written, but I felt in the interest of justice and in God's eye that maybe that was the best way to try to resolve this. And then Holly agreed to deal with it on her end to take it under an issue by issue basis with those citations. I believe all 13 of them were dismissed, which I felt was appropriate. I probably would have taken a little bit different direction had I have realized that Easter Mass was going on. And, this being my first year changing over and being a CSO, I'm still on that learning curve a little bit also. Going to the next slide, there's the pie chart that we put together, and it basically breaks down the parking citations through first of the year to June 15th. And you'll notice again, as I stated, the primary focus of the parking citations are with residential permit. And the bulk of those residential permit tickets come from around the university, as I stated. Overtime parking is downtown, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Yellow zones are another real issue with us, as Chief Brown's going to get into, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the fines and my issues with the fines. You notice that it's high because I've actually had students come up to me and tell me, well, I'm late to class and I'll just pay the $10 ticket, and they'll park in the yellow zone right in front of me. There's not much I can do, but this, here's your $10 ticket, and they don't care. It's not correcting the behaviors, I guess the best way to explain it. The crosswalks, blocking crosswalks, obstructing intersections are another minor area, and then 15 feet of fire hydrant. Fire hydrants are another big problem around the University of Wyoming, specifically in the 1400 block of Ivinson and in the 1200 block of Ivinson. They love to park by those fire hydrants. I don't know why. I can only guess that we're late to class again once again. In going to our next slide with the bond schedule, the University of Wyoming is trying to create this walking campus. And what I found since doing this is you now have a university campus that's pushing this agenda on their student body who doesn't want to walk. And that we've all seen Forrest Gump with that, where he talks about we've been through every kind of little bit of rain there is, with stinging rain and rain that comes up from the well, that's the way I think they feel when it's snowing or it's 20 below zero, and they don't want to walk 5 blocks to campus or 6 blocks. So in their mind, it's like, I'll take the $10 ticket all day long. And so when I was hired on with the police department in December 1st of 2001, I don't really remember any of these bonds ever changing from $10. The 2 that I know specifically have changed is residential permit parking, and it was $25, and handicap parking was $50. And the reason I know these things is I sent my chief a quick little picture because my wife never throws anything away, and she actually had a parking citation from 2001 where I was able to do a direct comparison. She also had one from 1994, but as I explained to Chief Brown, that I felt that one was a little bit irrelevant, to what we're trying to accomplish here. The main issues that, and the other one that also changed was the overtime parking, which went from $5 to $10. But really, there hasn't been any change in our bond schedule, significant adjustments or change in our bond schedule as long as I personally can remember. These are the University of Wyoming fee schedule, and I'll let you look down through that. Specifically, I want to jump down to number 2. And number 2 talks about parking in an accessible space without a disability permit. That's basically your handicap parking, and they're charging $200 for a handicap. Our handicap's $100. Another one is if you jump down to number 4, parking in a yellow zone, they're $50, we're $10. Again, students will pay $10 all day long if they're running late to class. If we jump down to number 7, and these are kind of the ones that are more in line with what we do on a day-to-day basis routinely, is parking in a no park. Those are $10. And the university is $43. Those $10 parking tickets, you might say to yourself, well, no park. But if you think about the intersection of the 1400 block of Ivinson right there at the intersection of 15th and Ivinson, think about those great big huge Transpark buses that are trying to turn right off of Ivinson to go westbound down Ivinson. And people park all the way back into that yellow zone, and those buses can't make the corner. They literally have to turn into the oncoming lane of travel. It's not posted no park, it's a yellow zone. And again, people will park there $10. In my mind, it's something that the Traffic Commission needs to address, but that's outside of what we're here tonight for. If we jump down to number 12, the overtime, number 11, 12, overtime violation on a metered time area. We don't have anything like that, but it's something that the chief's going to talk with you a little bit more about. Failing to display a permit, number 11, that would get into our residential permit parking, where if they alter a permit, if they don't date a permit, they don't write it in ink, they hide it, they don't put it face up, they put it face down, any of that kind of mischief, as I like to put it, is it's $50. And for the University of Wyoming, they're $26. So with that one, we're kind of, in my mind, on par, because we're giving these people permits and we're giving the ability to say, hey, you can lawfully park here, and sometimes those people can't follow the rules. And then if that's the case, then we'll issue those $50 tickets, and if they feel that it's unfair, then it goes to the municipal court judge, which is the correct venue, and then she gets, or he, if we get a new judge, gets to determine what if anything is going to happen with that, whether it's going to be dismissed or no, they get to pay the $50 fine. Going on to the next slide, we jump to the this is the Cheyenne Police Department. Sorry, I got my sheets a little out of order. Their handicap, if you look at number 2, is $125. Ours is $100. Parking time limit is $10. Theirs is $30. That's the very top one. Those are the very top 2. Basically from 3, most all the way down to well, 24, anything that's relevant to our city code, they're at $30, we're at $10, which is where, like I said, we've been since 2000, that I can remember from 2001. And there's been no modifications in our bond schedule. We also don't have an ordinance for like interference with parking enforcement, where if people are interfering with us and they want to have an argument, and I'm not going to get engaged with an argument because I'm not the correct place for that to take place. That's something that I will call an officer for, and then the officer gets to deal with it, and if it gets bad enough, then it obviously ends up before the judge or Judge Sanford in the circuit court. Hopefully we can diffuse it before it gets to that, but there's no real thing that we can do to kind of diffuse that ahead of time, to explain to them, look, please stop, or this is the direction this contact could possibly go in. Parking on a roadway, number 31 on that sheet is $30, and ours is $10. And that also would fall under the part if you're parked too far from a curb, meaning the vehicle's like 4, 6, 8, 10 feet from the curb and it's partially on the roadway and is a potential crash hazard. The final one on this is a tow violation, and this is one that I kind of had, well, actually I've had many conversations with Chief Brown about, and it kind of bothers me that we mark vehicles for 24-hour ordinance, or we tow a vehicle that's obstructing the street, and we're issuing that vehicle a $10 ticket. We are seizing somebody's personal property for $10. Cheyenne Police Department gives them a $250 ticket. That kind of made my heart, to me, a heart palpitation a little bit when I saw that. But on the flip side of that, I guess the violation should, the fine should meet or, fit what the violation is in my mind. There's a lot of things. If you run a stop sign, if driving drunk, driving under suspension, we can go through the whole gamut of things. Typically, all those bonds, they reflect the action that the civilian or, that our people are doing. And so we need to, I guess, think about, does that fine actually meet when we're actually seizing somebody's $50,000 Duramax pickup and we're giving them a $10 ticket? It doesn't sit real well with me. We go to the next slide. Casper, this is the Casper Police Department's bond schedule, and their top three, their first, second, and third violations. This is just general parking. And you notice theirs is tiered. It's $25, $50, and $75. We got them beats, all $10. There's no tier, there's no guesswork. We're $10. If you jump down under specific parking violations, the ones that are specific to us are parking on designated snow routes during snow removals, and that's the downtown. And this is also runs during the summertime when the street sweepers are going around, and we're $25, they're $50. And the next one down is parking on a street in the downtown business district between the hours of 6 and 3. We're between 2 and 6. And it depends, like Mondays it'll be north-south, Tuesdays it'll be northwest. And it's between 2 and 6, and we're both $25. We don't have a parking without current registration or license, which I know the chief's going to talk about, and I'm just going to plant that seed in your ear now, because I think as opposed to sticker and everything with abandon, if we had the ability to be able to address those issues up front with vehicles that displayed expired registration, that were somewhat or significantly outside of compliance with registrations, if we had the ability to put a parking ticket on there and say, look, we're asking you nicely, please get the registration on this. This is not going to do anything but to continue to get worse for you. Please do something about this, as opposed to us putting a green sticker on their window, which is, if any of you have had the experience of having that, or a 24-hour, they're absolute bugger to try to scrape off. And, we see them driving around all the time with the, the adhesive on the window. It's like, that one got marked. It would really, I think, ease up on that, just giving somebody a gentle reminder, as opposed to them coming out and their car's gone. Because I'm going to be a realist, that's what's going to happen. If we mark them for abandon, we typically give them 5 days unless it's some type of traffic hazard, and we tow them. And so I would be upset if I came out and my car was gone. And now it'd be my own fault, and whether I want to accept responsibility for that, that's neither here nor there. That'll be up for whatever the process is that's going to go through. The final thing is their last one is abuse, violation of various parking limits, and that's our residential, that's abuse. That would be abuse, again, of our temporary permits, which I have already addressed. They're $100, we're $50, because our residential permit's all $50. If we go to the next slide. The Fort Collins Police Department, they kind of do things a little different than we do. In looking at that, some of it fits, but if you jump down to the part where it says all other violations, that's the meat and potatoes of what we do. Again, you'll notice it says $25, $75 if an accident is involved. Again, we're $10. And if you jump down to their fee increase if not paid, so if they issue that $25 ticket and you don't pay it, then it's a $50 ticket. And then I'm sure that they have a process that continues to multiply that through failure to pay fines or come before the judge and explain yourself so that, you know, they can make a decision. With that being said, I know Chief Brown's going to take over from here because he has some things that he wants to go over. Does anybody have any questions on what I went over? I kind of feel like I went a little fast, but I know you guys are also limited on the time, and I could probably stand here and talk a lot, so.
Council, any questions? Councilor Shenway?
Thank you. I don't think the citizens understand how good they have it yet, so I'm sure that's going to change. Question I have is, we went round and round and round with the towing companies because it's so different. Towing a vehicle can be anywhere, well, I mean, if you call for a tow, it's $100. If you're towed because the police call it in, it's somewhere between $250 and $1,000. And it gets to where people just, you know, eventually say, my car's worth this much, they can have it. I'll take them the title. And it just gets to where it's onerous to the public for us to tow. I don't like the idea of having it's such a lucrative business for people to tow a car that costs them a fraction of what they come back to the students and to the people that, you know, are being towed. I don't, do we have any understanding or any agreement with these towing companies on what they will and what they won't charge someone that's had their vehicle towed?
So it's been my understanding and how it's worked since I've been employed with the city that there is no agreement or anything. I mean, these are all individual businesses run by individual business owners that get to make their own decision on what they're willing to charge, and I think it goes to what the market will bear. Typically, the bonds that I see for tow violations are anywhere from $225, and I've seen them as high as $425. And the $425 issue was actually a lady that blocked the driveway. She came out when the tow truck driver had the vehicle loaded on the rollback. They charged her $425 to drop the vehicle, which means they didn't even take it from the scene. It was $425 for them to unload it right there. I don't know what the solution to that is, if the city could contract directly with one or two specific tow companies, if they would entertain that. Yeah, sorry.
Real quick, so we are, actually, the city manager and I are actively exploring going out to request for a proposal for tow contracts. That is one option. What I've heard in the past, the reason for not doing that has been that some of the tow companies or all of the tow companies have said we're not going to participate in that. So we'll see if they will or not, but I think maybe holding their feet to the fire and having set fees for police tows, for drop fees, is a very reasonable expectation for some of our community partners.
Vice Mayor, let me just say this. Here in Laramie, there are some towing companies that operate same location with 4 different licenses, so they, you know, if they're on a rotation call, they unfairly take calls, which, if it were fairly distributed, and let's say we have 10 towing companies, I don't know if we have that many, but I would like to have it to where we say, this is what the city, if the city initiates the tow, this is what we're willing to pay. It's kind of like what doctors do with Medicare. If you want, if you're going to take a patient, we'll pay you so much, we won't pay you $450 if everybody else is charging $225. So I would like to get some kind of an agreement to where something that's reasonable, that they can still be profitable, but not in a point where they, not only do they charge the $450 to tow, but then they charge so much per day to put it on a dirt parking lot out in the middle of nowhere, and then they fence it off and lock it up, and you can't get to the vehicles, and it gets to the point where it's just, when someone has been towed, sometimes it's the biggest nightmare they'll have the entire year. So I want to make it to where we have some kind of a reasonable agreement that, that they will be, when they're towed, that they're going to be accessible, and that it'll be uniform instead of, all over the place.
Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, thanks. And it's on the towing issue.
So it's mine.
Okay,
So, yeah,
go ahead. So you go ahead.
You can go ahead.
Okay, so, oh, sorry.
So, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think state statute does not allow cities, municipalities to actually have a tow truck and get in the towing business, if I recall correctly. Is that? But I think they allow counties to be in the towing business. Yes, no?
So if I can, council member, I'd have to confirm with the city attorney. I don't know if that's necessarily an area that we want to get into, because then it's kind of, we're towing the cars, and also either us or the county is towing the cars, and then they're also responsible for collecting fees for the tows.
Right.
I think what I'm comfortable with, and I've had these conversations with the city manager also, is setting set fees for tows, where it's not flexible, and the citizens know whether it's going to be a $250 set fee or $440, whatever that number is that we agree upon. And the best way that I've seen it done in our industry is through RFPs, contracts, 3-year, 4-year contracts with a rotation, and anybody who's willing to meet the city's requirements, then they're added to our tow list where we do rotation. And we do some of that now. We've had issues with abandoned vehicles specifically, because with a lot of the abandoned vehicles, especially over by Wyotech, some of those vehicles are pretty torn apart. So the tow companies necessarily aren't making any money when they go resell those vehicles once they obtain the title.
Right, and the only reason I bring that up is I would really prefer private industry to partner with us in this field. But if they don't, and we still want to be effective, we have limited options, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate piece.
Councilor Newman.
So I just want to address some of the stuff that you guys were mentioning. So rotation, back home, so from Kansas, the rotation didn't go by business name. It went by the owner of the company. That way they couldn't own 4 or 5 different companies. And then if they, let's say I owned one and then my wife owned one, theoretically that's a gray area. So then the second thing they looked at was business address. And that's something that you guys might look at too. That way the rotations are fair. So when it comes to contracts, the cool part about when I was in Kansas, I rented our part of our location when we had our shop to a tow truck company. So I got really involved in his company as well and learned the contracts and the set fees kind of, when it took place when warrants went to those, it helped the public know exactly what it was going to be, and it didn't like stop the kind of shady, air quotes there, businesses from charging whatever they wanted, because it was a big thing that it was, in the local news and everything, that they towed a car 1 block downtown and charged them over $1,000 because these fees weren't set up. So I would like to, look at these contracts and have set fees and have a bidding process as well. And then I had something else, so if anybody else has something.
Counselor Gabriel.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Give you a chance to remember maybe.
To either one of you, but I was very frustrated. I took my daughter to campus a number of times north of the engineering building in that area, over by the science building, all that new construction, and to see the crosswalks, the corners blocked. But with this new paint now that I've noticed north of 15th Street being put on the corners, it looks like that's going to be, I haven't checked the university lately to see if that's going to be, well, I'm sure that's going in shortly, but that's going to make a big difference, I'm sure, to get the corners painted so we can have it clearly defined where you should and shouldn't park. Because it was very frustrating to go up to a corner and have no idea, who was coming or going until you got halfway out into the intersection. So would you comment on the corner painting with that situation coming up?
So I can give you my opinion. We're probably going to have to wait and see when the students are back here, how much of an impact it's going to have. But I think I can speak from being in the field and then also having discussions with Bob. I think that oftentimes when people are late to something or the weather's bad, they kind of park wherever they want. And as we mentioned before with our bond schedule, our fees, in my opinion, and based on what we've seen and heard, we've had students tell us that it's cheaper to pay the $10 fine than the $400 parking pass or the $500 parking pass. So one of our recommendations is that we continue to explore increasing the fees. If we have the same prices since 2001, you see what our industry partners, other municipalities are charging. It's just not consistent with inflation. And we still have a responsibility to make sure that we're collecting some of the costs that we're paying our CSOs and our officers to go out there and enforce this, and also make sure that it's a deterrent to the community so that they're not continually getting parking fines. And we've had some where we've seen through our court system that they've had several $1,000s in parking fines.
I can add on that too a little bit. The city recently also bought a new curb painter. Instead of that little tricycle truck they have something a lot bigger. And speaking with Parks Manager Shane Johnson, and I know he showed me the map where they've been out and they've been actively painting these curbs yellow to address your questions, Mr. Gabriel. And from what I've seen specifically around the west and the north side of the University of Wyoming, it's greatly helped me. And it's also greatly deterred these people from actually parking where they were parking, where this paint was so deteriorated or it wasn't painted at all. So it is working.
Counselor Newman.
Sorry, I remembered what I was going to say. I actually wrote it down too, so I wouldn't forget again. Two different questions, two different topics. The first one is, are there any stats, because I've kind of looked online as well, so are there any stats to back up that if we increase these fees that it would deter some of these parking? Because back home, parking ticket was like $5 or $10, and I had no problem paying that on some of those days too. And so are there any stats to back it up that if we do raise these, that could help us with the parking?
I'll have to look into that, not that I'm aware of, or not that I've seen. And the majority of our recommendation comes from, one, what other jurisdictions are doing, and also, two, the conversations that we've had with members of the community.
And disclaimer, I'm totally for raising the parking fees. The second part is totally different. Will you guys touch on the trailer parking law that the city council, I know we've had this conversation, and
If you want me to.
Go ahead.
and I wasn't on council when this law relapsed or whatever happened, and I didn't know much about it until you and I talked about it. So, and talking to residents over in my ward, trailer parking on public streets is becoming a problem. So can you hit on that a little bit for us?
Absolutely, Mr. Newman. So I've actually spoke with Mr. Gabriel about this also, and the issue that we have seen as of late is after the city council did away with the part of the city ordinance that said that you couldn't park a camper on a city street more than X number of days while it was hooked to a vehicle or you were unloading it. You couldn't permanently park it on a city street. We have been, for a lack of lesser words, inundated with calls of trailers blocking intersections. Prime example that I would give you, a call, one specific trailer that's still there that we get calls on all the time is a white enclosed trailer up by the A1 rental. Right there, people, I can't count the people that have waved me down, talked to me, calls that have come into dispatch, calls that I've responded to, where people have said, you know, that trailer needs to be moved. I've almost got into a crash, et cetera. And if you go to that intersection, I understand completely what they're saying, because the trailer is legally parked. It has valid registration, so that it's not enforceable for us to do anything. But if we still had that ordinance in place that said that they couldn't leave it for X number of days or hours, and they had to move it because it couldn't be parked on a city street, then that would resolve that issue on those intersections. Other issues we have is fifth wheels. Fifth wheels are another big problem that we have. I think that if any one of us have driven around, I mean, you yourself have experienced what I'm talking about. And that ordinance, when we had it, we didn't have to go ticket people. We could go and we could run the registration and talk to them, give them the ordinance, and we got compliance. People would move them. Now we have no ability to do that. Our hands are tied. And so we're forced to tell the community that we're helpless. There's nothing that we can do for you. We're sorry. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because that comes back directly to public safety, which we're entrusted with. And we can't keep them safe because you can't tell them to move the trailer. Sooner or later, there's going to be a crash.
Do you have an idea of, sorry, a short follow-up. Do you have an idea on how many parking spots that you kind of see throughout the city taken up by these trailers and fifth wheels?
You know, I've never went around and counted them, but I think if you drove down 4th Street, if you drove down Sheridan Street, if you drove up 4th Street, they're all around. I mean, anywhere you go, you're going to see campers parked on city streets where they weren't before. And I'm not talking little campers, I'm talking great big enclosed, big trailers that are block people's view and they can't see.
Councilor Shumway and then Councilor Pierce.
Just a question. If the council were to adopt a parking policy to have a 4-block donut around the university, which would be for residential and city parking only, would that make your job easier?
What do you mean by a donut?
A donut. It means university property out through the residential areas for 4 blocks in every north, south, east, and west. In, a donut around the university where it's for city and residential parking only. And it doesn't provide, which means it doesn't provide parking for staff, students, and faculty. It provides parking for the people that own the property in those residential areas. Now, there's other universities that have done this very successfully. For some reason, we have never attempted to, we just do it, I think maybe 20, 30% in these residential parking spots in different areas. But if we had a donut, which means no students, faculty, or staff at the University of Wyoming can park anywhere except in designated university parking spots, or else take the satellites into campus, they would know that if they're parking anywhere within, from the campus out 4 blocks, they're in violation of parking. Would that make your job easier?
Well, that's a slippery slope. This is definitely a double-edged sword here that you gave me, Mr. Shumway. And so looking at both sides of both sides of the road here, on one side of the road, I think that it would definitely help us. It would definitely more concretely outline where people can and can't park and where those enforcement districts are. Do I think it's going to deter the students? No. It comes back to, if it's cold, they're going to pay a ticket. I don't know what the solution to that to that is. On the residence side, on the other side of the road with that, the residential permit parking passes are $12 a year. They're going to now come to the city council and say, so you're going to penalize me for living, 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks from the university in this designated area, and now I have to pay $12 a year for every single vehicle that I have to park in front of my house. I don't know what the common ground is. I think that the signs work well. I think the problems with the signs are people ignore them. They say they don't see them. They don't care. They'd just rather pay the fine. So in my mind is, and I know Chief Brown kind of touched on this a little bit, and that, money is not always a motivator with everything that we do in life. But I can tell you this, if you statistically go back to traffic enforcement statistics that are through the National Highway Safety Traffic Administration, traffic enforcement reduces crashes. Anybody can Google that. Parking enforcement reduces mischief, bad decisions for them parking there. And if those fines are significant enough, and those fines are consistently enforced, and those fines are consistently put on those cars, sooner or later, either they're going to correct their behavior through the lack of their checkbook, or B, they're going to get in line with the permit or, something else. I don't know what the something else would be, but I can tell you sooner or later, if you're given enough parking citations, it corrects behavior. And I've even seen this at $10 a citation, where I've written cars 20, 25, 30, tickets.
Just to follow up, I believe residents and also students living in apartments, et cetera, would much prefer to pay $12 a year to a $400 or $500 university parking permit.
I would agree with that, Mr. Shumway. Absolutely.
Counselor Pierce.
Yeah, you've not necessarily asked, but I will say I'm really supportive of reevaluating our bond or fee structure. One thing I'd like to add to that, if I could, is even though those university fines appear to be pretty significant, they really hold the student over the barrel because they can't register for classes, right? If they happen to have, an overdue book or a parking fine or whatever it happens to be. So they have a stick that gets payment, right? And what I don't want to see from a city perspective is repeated offenders ending up incarcerated, right? Or spending a night in jail. I would like to see us come up with a pick up the trash or whatever it happens to be program that we can, if they're unable to pay or they've had 3 citations or whatever we come up with, or you come up with for a proposal, that we have some community service involved with that, if we could. I don't know what other council members think of that, but I just don't want it to go so far that now there's like a warrant out for somebody's arrest because of a parking ticket. And maybe that happens in a lot of cities. Maybe that's okay. I don't know. I have no idea if that even happens, but I just like to see like a plan B, if that helps. And I also think on another topic, in terms of like these big old campers or trailers getting parked in a lot of places, if we actually got to the point where all these intersections were painted yellow, the 15 or 20 feet that we decided months ago, and then we could ticket based on the fact that they were in a yellow, I think that might really help with the safety issue in terms of, we don't have a stick to have you move your camper. Because I think a lot of these campers that I see that are so darn close to the intersection's not painted. Mm-hmm. And if the intersection were painted, and if it were like, you can't park this close, I don't think we'd be having the problems that we do with some, not all, but at least a percentage of the folks with the bigger campers, or whatever the correct word is for the house barn. So, yeah. And when we look at our fee schedule, I really think there are things that we really need to be very strict and enforceful about, like fire hydrants, for example. You know, there are certain things that have to be clear because of emergencies. And that's where we really need to potentially tow and really enforce certain things, because you can't have somebody parked in front of a fire hydrant or other things associated with safety. So.
Counselor Richardson.
Thank you. I am also in favor of kind of exploring this fee structure more. At first glance, not having kind of dived in and researched at all, but I don't think I would be as in favor of the increasing the fines if not paid as well, because I think you kind of get back into a similar situation where a person maybe is in a position where I just hate to get someone is just such a deep hole that they can't get back out. So that's kind of along what you were talking about there, Jane.
Counselor Newman?
I wonder if it's something we can build into the diversion program to where parking could be part of it as well. So they're not in this, because I don't want them in this problem either, right? So a parking ticket that is unpaid that keeps going on, now we got to put them in jail maybe, or I don't have to, you guys have to.
Can I respond? So right now, the threshold that the municipal court judge has set the warrants at for parking is $200. And you might think to yourself, well, that's not really that much. That's 20 $10 parking tickets. That's somebody that's dug themselves 20 times into that hole.
Counselor O'Doherty.
Officer Austin, I just want to thank you for all the thought that went into this and for raising our awareness. I appreciate your point of view because you're seeing things that we don't see. So when you put in some opinion, I was happy to hear that. Also, I appreciate your sense of humor. And so thank you so much for presenting this to us. I feel like it's really useful. I would love for Traffic Commission to explore a tiered fee schedule for parking violations, and I know campers are a problem, but I also know this is a town where people have a lot of toys, and so we'd be balancing half of our population, but when people have a line of sight when they're trying to get through an intersection, that's the most important thing. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Brown. Thank you for hearing me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is he in?
Can we get Bob's last name? I didn't catch it.
I didn't either.
Bob, what is your last name? Not was. What's your last name?
Austin.
Thank you.
And unless there's any additional questions, reference the parking portion.
Well, we need to go to public comment before we move on. I didn't know if you were continuing with parking. So,
That's all we have.
okay. Is there any public comment?
I'm here just in time.
If you're online, raise your hand. If you're in the audience,
Vice Mayor, we have Brett Glass online.
okay. Please bring Mr. Glass into the gallery. Good evening, Mr. Glass.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just noticed on the last slide of the presentation that there was a discussion of metering parking downtown. I actually think that's a good idea for the on-street spaces, but please, as you consider changes to the parking regime, make sure that there is a place for workforce parking for the people who work downtown, the park all day, and for residents of downtown, the park for longer. I've already submitted a white paper to council talking about downtown parking issues. Please just make sure that that's not ignored before you make any policy decisions, or it could have a disastrous effect on the quality of life downtown.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Are there any other comments from the public? Ms. Devine?
I am actually opposed to increasing fines on parking. The problem is there's not enough parking, and then it seems like what we're going to do then are penalize our citizens in the community because they can't find anywhere to park. And for the university, like to pay for a parking pass, I don't even know where the parking is for the students, and $425 can probably be someone's meal ticket, right? And so I don't think that they're being flippant by saying I'd rather pay the $10 than for the full thing. So I don't know what the solution is, but I don't think that it should be passed on to folks that just can't find a parking. And I appreciate, I started calling Sergeant Austin, our community service officer, being here. I know that he's put a lot of work into it, but it seems like we always default to then paying, increase in fines. It's not going to be a deterrent. People are still going to try to find a parking spot no matter what the ticket is. We just need to figure out the problem to the parking. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Devine. Any other comments? Seeing none, back to council. Do you have any further comments before we move on to the next topic? I just, I'm just curious about the numbers of people that are repeat offenders that have 5, 10 tickets in a year. And how significant is that? And then could a graduated fee implemented help to deter that? So first ticket, $10, second ticket, $20, third ticket, $30, would that deter repeat offenders? Do you think it's a certain repeat offender that contributes a group, or is it more generalized? Chief?
Vice Mayor, I think we probably see a little bit of both. I think it depends on the area of the city that we're talking about or exploring. There's definitely different areas of the city where parking is more challenged, specifically around the university, where you see a significant amount of repeat offenders. And I can tell you recently, I believe that an individual was contacted, and I want to say he had $830 worth of parking tickets. And his issue wasn't that he couldn't pay the parking tickets, it was that he thought that nothing was ever going to come of it. So he just kept getting parking tickets and parking in places that he shouldn't have been. So I think you see a little bit of both. I think it's individual specific, and everybody has their own circumstances as to whether they're able to pay for a ticket or their life circumstances. Another option is always, and the city manager and I have talked about this, is to give an option if they're able to pay in the first 7 days where it's a lower fine. Maybe it's a $20 fine in the first 24 hours or 7 days, and then if they don't pay that, then it jumps to the full rate. rate of $40. And I think you see that in Fort Collins also. And some of our partners, and I believe it was Casper and Fort Collins, also have a graduated schedule where it goes from, I believe, $25.50 to $75 for the third offense. And I believe Casper is 6 months, and I think for Fort Collins is in a year, if I recall correctly. It's somewhere in that ballpark, and then it resets.
One other question. In your work that you're doing right now to review this, are you also working with the university?
So I had through Vice Mayor, I had an opportunity to talk with Chief Holland a couple weeks ago on this specific issue and some of their challenges. And sort of, I think it's two separate issues. I think the university has their own problems because they are trying to enforce on their property where they have the ability to have administrative restrictions, which has a significant amount of teeth to it. Whereas on our side, we don't have that same teeth in the fine schedule. And really even when they're issuing warrants, that's not necessarily the way that we'd like to go either, especially if it's individuals who aren't able to pay for the tickets. And I can tell you, usually when that's the case, I usually get a phone call. And that's something that we can talk about with the city prosecutor when people are not able to pay for tickets. But by and large, the warrants, when they're issued, that's usually not the case that we see with those repeat offenders. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some additional options, including meters. I had an opportunity to walk downtown and talk with several business owners who addressed the issue of parking downtown. And I think a lot of it just depends on your perspective. Where I come from, walking a block from one of the local parking lots to downtown is still really close. But I think what some of the business owners are seeing with their frustration is that employees from other businesses are parking downtown for lengthy periods of time. And while we have great community service officers, unfortunately, when they're down there citing tickets or marking tires for potential violations, usually people come out and move their cars and then notify their friends and other people in that area to move their cars, which is what you want, but we just don't have the ability to do that every single day, where I think utilizing technology in that avenue kind of takes us out of the equation as police officers and you out of the equation as city representatives. It's the same metered approach for every individual in the city, whether it's a visitor or a resident.
It seems that as the university over the past years has promoted increasing the walking campus, there's been a progressive reduction in parking spots, especially for students. And I just wonder, maybe this would be something to add into the town and gown revamping, that the university become a little more proactive, that if you're removing all of these parking spaces, how are you going to get students back and forth? Some students late at night studying. I think that would be something for us to work with them toward a more collaborative and proactive approach, because we really put the students in a compromised position sometimes, I think. All right, we'll move on to the next topic. And Chief?
Once again, I'm going to tap one of our experts in this field, and we have the pleasure of having one of our DCI special agents on Zoom tonight, so I will allow him to introduce himself. I will say that much like former Sergeant Austin and Community Service Officer Austin now, this individual has a unique skill set and expertise in this field, and I'm excited to share what he has to say. So, Chip, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chief. That's a big introduction to live up to. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, ma'am. Greetings to everyone. Thank you, esteemed members of the council, mayor, guests, and citizens. I am Chip Cirillo. I'm currently assigned on a drug task force with the Division of Criminal Investigation. My home agency is Laramie Police Department, and my office is out of the Laramie Police Department as well. I'm not sure who's controlling the slides, but we can go on to the next slide. I'm going to talk about what we do, how we do it, and where it came about, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of fentanyl. One thing I would like to say about the parking situation real quick, especially Transpark, I don't know where they're trained. I don't know if it's CIA or whomever, but boy, they can show up sometimes like the Spanish Inquisition from Monty Python and get those tickets on pretty quick. I think we need to get some of them on our side. But so we'll move on to this. What is the Rocky Mountain HIDA is what we call it. It's the high intensity drug trafficking area. As you can see here, it was established in 1996 because they realized that we needed to work with our federal partners all the way down to our local agencies to have a coherent and cohesive response to the issues that are affecting all of us. And that is illicit drugs, as well as human trafficking, counterterrorism, so on and so forth. As you can see, these are the states and the counties that fall under the Rocky Mountain high intensity drug trafficking region, and I'll be referring to it as HIDA from now on. Next. So we have drug task forces. I'm a drug task force officer, special agent. I'm sworn in, so dual role. I'm a sworn police officer as well as special agent with Division of Criminal Investigation. We have 4 highway criminal interdiction programs and 1 fugitive apprehension task force as well. Because we have 2 major transshipment corridors going through our state, I-25 north and south, I-80 east and west, and actually I-90 as well. A great deal of illicit trade and traffic moves on those highways. Our troopers are phenomenal at interdiction. In fact, we did a joint operation with them last week in Cheyenne, and they are very good at what they do. And I'm very privileged to work with our city, our state, our county officers in protecting all of our citizens. Next slide. We have a huge area that we're responsible for. If you stack some states up on the eastern seaboard into our area, it would cover a massive region. Next. As you can see, this it's a very large area that we have responsibility for. Ours, since DCI is broken down into teams, there's Southeast Enforcement Team, Southwest Enforcement Team, Central Enforcement Team, Northwest, and Northeast. I am part of the Southeast Enforcement Team, and our primary areas are Albany, Laramie, Goshen, and Platte County. That's still quite a large geographic area, which has I-25 and I-80 going through it. Next. A large population in that area that we govern and we're responsible for. We are a small state. We are a small law enforcement agency. In fact, the total number of sworn officers, and that's everyone that is municipal, county, troopers, and DCI officers, is under 1,000 sworn officers in the state of Wyoming for a population that's around 600,000. And at any one time, only probably about 1/4 to 1/5 of those officers are on duty at any one time. So you can see the challenges that we're facing as far as enforcement and tracking and investigating some of these high-intensity drug trafficking areas, and it's coming from other states that have larger populations and have a much larger base of operations for these drug trafficking organizations. Next. A lot of people ask us where fentanyl is coming from. And for those of you that don't know what fentanyl is, it's a very powerful synthetic opioid. It's anywhere from 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. It can be 50 to 100 times more powerful than heroin. It is extremely toxic when it's abused, and just as few as 5 times use will get somebody hooked. It is comparable, like if you've got someone who's a heroin addict and they're using, they get what we call dope sick, or feeling the symptoms of withdrawal anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. With fentanyl, it's anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. So what this does, not only do you hook this person and you get them sick and get them dependent on this poison, because it really is poison, but then you have a built-in customer base that has to have this toxic substance to even survive and maintain some semblance of normalcy for them. It is very hard to kick. A lot of folks think, oh, I can kick this. You need medical assistance to kick any kind of opioid addiction, but especially fentanyl. You can see down on the bottom where the individual dosage units of fentanyl seized in 2021 just skyrocketed compared to 2017. We've seen an exponential increase even from then. The amount and poundage that's coming across our southwest border is staggering. Next. Again, it's tragic math. These numbers, these percentages are almost incomprehensible. Also, the profit margin that these drug trafficking organizations are seeing are also incredible. As they say, follow the money, and that's part of what we do. We don't want to get the individual user and hem them up. We want to save them. We want to save everyone, but we want to get into the system and work our way up the food chain. We want to get to these drug lords that are moving this poison into our communities. Next. As you can see, again, these graphs are just, it almost belies belief how fast this poison has come into our society and hooked so many people and caused so much damage. And it goes across all socioeconomic bounds. Back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, heroin was considered, like a dirty poor person drug. And then when meth first came out, it was a dirty poor person drug. With heroin, when we first started seeing it resurge back 2011, 2012, and then with the prescription drug crisis that we had, and now with fentanyl, it touches everyone. I challenge anyone to say that they don't know someone who has either used it, been harmed by it, or lost a loved one. And that is, it still boggles the mind, even for us dealing with this. And the tide is still cresting. Next. This is most of what we're seeing. You can see the pills down there on the bottom. These are counterfeit Oxy 30s. They're called 30s, M's, M30s, Blues, Fenty, Downs, different names for these. But you can see where the profit margin starts to grow. On average, some of the stuff coming through the southwest border is about 25 cents a pill, and it just steps up from there. Whomever's hand it passes through, someone's going to make profit on it every step of the way. Now, I had one individual I spoke with. They do 20 pills a day at anywhere from $25 to $30 to $40 a pill. Because again, they've got to have this pill every 45 minutes to an hour. And most of the time, what they're doing, they're smoking it. They're putting it on a piece of foil called a foilie, using a heat source, just a lighter, and a little tube to smoke the fumes coming off of it. And it chars it and makes a very particular geometric pattern. You see the dark charring, you see the burning underneath. Those are indicators for our street officers that this is the type of drug use that's going on. Rarely are we seeing intravenous use of fentanyl because you just can't control the strength. Last summer, along the I-25 corridor, they were seeing anecdotally some concentrations in these counterfeit oxys of 30 to 40% fentanyl, and it was killing a great deal of people. And then it seems now that we're seeing about 3 to 4% concentration of fentanyl in these counterfeit pills, but still toxic, still addictive. And then anecdotally as well, we're hearing about xylazine, which I'll touch on as well. Next slide. Criminality. If you're needing to pay for 20 pills a day, you're not always being a productive citizen in society. You're trying maybe to maintain it, but it's horribly destructive to you, your family, your friends, the society in general. So you're going to have to find some way to make money to get this supply and keep this supply steady for yourself. And you see the commensurate increase in crime. As you see down below, NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. We don't have as much data in Wyoming yet. We're getting it. And it's still pretty much commensurate with what you're seeing in other states. Next slide. Criminality, the desperation that these people are seeing, as well as the horrible effect, the electrochemical effects it has on the brain and your body, seeing a significant increase in violent crime. In fact, Colorado in 2021 was #1 in the country for bank robberies, largely due and fueled by the fentanyl epidemic. Next. Again, we can see just the huge increase with the opioid-related overdose deaths. We're trying very hard to track this. We have a great intel cell over in Cheyenne at headquarters. I'm just a field agent. I'm not a chemist or a scientist. I'm the guy that goes through the door. And our officers are highly trained, highly motivated, and extremely professional. And when we deal with these folks, we treat them with compassion and dignity, and we really want them to get better. We really want them to get away from this. We've had meth dealers here in town come to us spontaneously and want to talk to us and be interviewed and saying, my friends are dying from this. You've got to do something. And it really breaks your heart. Someone who's fighting an addiction to methamphetamine saying, hey, this stuff is really bad. Because I don't know of any drugs that are really good. And you keep hearing, somebody got into a bad batch. There's no such thing as a good batch of fentanyl, especially this counterfeit stuff. Next. This is straight from the Wyoming Department of Health. As you can see, all the indices and the increases. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of open source data, like I said, from the Wyoming Department of Health site. It's great and speaks to what we're dealing with in our state. Next. This is just for our state. You can see that we're there. Now, Alameda County is there on this page. We are seeing a great deal of naloxone being used, which is a good thing. But the thing with naloxone, which is called Narcan, is when it's administered intranasally, and you just put it up your nose and push the button on the bottom, and it's 4 milligrams. Your body absorbs it very quickly. In fact, it's so quick of an opioid blocker that the individual will come out of their stupor and be on the fight because their body, that opioid has been blocked. But Narcan is metabolized quicker by your body than the opioid. So you've got to monitor that individual for at least 2 hours after that last application of Narcan to make sure that everything's reaching homeostasis again with their system and the opioid that's still in their body is not going to get metabolized again, and another chance for a secondary overdose because of what's still left in their body. Next. These are very sad numbers. This is someone's loved one. This is someone's son, daughter, mom, dad, grandparent, grandchild. This is the human tragedy of this poison that's in our community. Next. This data is from a site called ODMAP, and I just found this and was able to sign up on it. It is data that the PII, the personal identifying information, is removed from the individuals because we believe in the dignity of the individual, that, and even in death, that, you know, everyone knows someone who's died or been affected by this, but we don't want to compound the family's grief and tragedy and say, you know, well, look at all these names. These are all the people that died. But we want to use this to fight this scourge. And what this does, this is a feature from ODMAP. It's called heat mapping, which shows the clusters and the groups of responses we've had. As you see over here in the lower left, total suspected overdoses, suspected fatal overdoses, and naloxone or Narcan applied. Next. Again, this heat mapping is a great tool for us, but it also anonymizes the addresses and everything else. So we can extrapolate because our officers, and I'll tell you what, Laramie PD, I would put them up against any other agency in the state for recruitment, training, professionalism, response to any and all kinds of events, but especially for suspected overdoses. We've got officers, I don't know many officers now, but who've gotten commendations and life-saving medals for bringing people back from Narcan or from opioid overdoses. But as you can see, and if you know the city of Laramie, you can tell where certain areas are that seem to be having more problems than others. I don't want to stigmatize any neighborhood. I don't want to stigmatize any area. Again, this crosses all socioeconomic boundaries. So you can see there's some really nice areas in town that have issues with these opioids as well. No one is immune from this. Next. Again, this is from ODMAP. And where this data comes from is what's called the WATER system, which is the Wyoming Ambulance. I don't know the whole acronym. I'm terrible with that. But it is data that is used when EMS is evaluating the patient and treating them and getting them the care they need. And again, another one of our city partners, the Laramie Fire Department, I put them up against any other agency in the state or region as far as professionalism, response, especially life-saving abilities. I'm very lucky to work closely with them. In fact, I'm on our special response team, and we have medics with them on our team. And they're our go-to for our lifesavers. They're our heroes. So as you see down here at the bottom, though, with this graph, what it explains, the non-fatal overdose, and no naloxone was given, non-fatal, a single dose was given, non-fatal, multiple doses of naloxone were given, fatal, no naloxone. And oftentimes that's because they might have, the victim might have been dead for quite a long time. Although I've been on scenes and I've seen firsthand where someone looks like they're dead. They're purple, their eyes are rolled back, they're literally foaming at the mouth. And we've given them Narcan, and the change is incredibly rapid. And they've had their lives saved. But this graph, we would like to see all of these indices go to zero. But we can't do it alone. We have to do it with the entire community. We are not apart from the community. We're part of the community. I live here. I work here. I love what I do. I love our citizens. I love all of our partners that work together to fight this poison. Next. This is just speaking about the data and everything else that goes into ODMAP and how it's compiled. It is some of the most accurate data that we can get, but again, to protect individuals' dignity and their HIPAA rights as well under federal guidelines, it has to be anonymized, and all the PIIs have to be removed. Next. These are just where I got my information and source data from. Next. And please, any questions you have. Just a little bit about me. I've been a sworn law enforcement officer just over 17 years. Previous to that, I was 25 years military. I've been on this drug team just over a year now. One thing I'd like to touch on, I mentioned xylazine, and I know folks have heard about it. We're seeing small trace amounts in most of the samples we're sending to the state lab of fentanyl that we're seizing. We're not seeing at the toxicity rates that we're seeing on the East Coast. I'm sure it's coming. What xylazine does, it's a non-opioid large animal tranquilizer. It's basically an accelerant to the fentanyl. It increases the strength of the high and lengthens it. The problem is when you use Narcan to stop the fentanyl toxicity, it stops it. But the xylazine suppresses your heart and breathing, and you've got to start breathing for the individual. So we're learning, we're always kind of one step behind on this at times because policing oftentimes is reactive to what's happening in society. But we're learning that, okay, Narcan is not a magic wand anymore. We've got to do rescue breathing. We've got to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And we're evolving. We're learning. We're doing the after action reports, and we're pushing as much information as we can down to the lowest level as fast as we can to fight this scourge. I'd like to thank you for giving me time to come before the council and speak with you all. It's a privilege to work here. We're very happy to have Chief Brown here leading the way, and I'd like to entertain any questions you have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Do you pronounce your last name Cirillo?
No, ma'am. It's Cirillo. It's Italian.
Cirillo. Thank you. So does anyone have questions for Agent Cirillo? Counselor?
You can just call me Chip.
Chip. Thank you, Chip,
Thank
for
you,
your
sir.
presentation tonight. I was just curious, you talked about how effective Narcan is. Can you tell me the percentage of the officers that are trained in its use?
100% at the Laramie PD, sir. That's, excuse me, under the direction and leadership of Chief Brown.
Thank you.
Counselor Shumway?
Chip, a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I think we're getting a little bit better at identifying some of the old drugs, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, things like that. But I don't know how we could identify or know that, this is fentanyl. But let me ask you this. Is fentanyl something that a person could get through their pharmacy? And why do they start on fentanyl? Is it for pain? Is it for recreation?
Yes, sir. I'll answer your second question first. Fentanyl was developed by, I believe, a German scientist. It's a synthetic opioid that was used for palliative care, for pain management, for end-of-life situations. We first started seeing it back in about 2012, 2013, abuse of the fentanyl patches, a transdermal patch that has a surgical grade adhesive with the fentanyl in an emulsion matrix in the adhesive. So it would be placed on an arm, under the arm or on the hip or somewhere, and it's basically a timed release into your system for people with stage 4 cancer or other issues. There were accidental overdoses where people would throw those patches away in the trash, and the child would pick it up and touch it or put it in their mouth, and they could die. In fact, I handled one individual many years ago when I worked for the sheriff's office south of town. She had 3 patches on her and she had died. And we were trying to save her life. And I put my hand up underneath her arm. We're trying to move her out of the bed. And I got the fentanyl adhesive on my hand and had to get it off pretty quickly. There's a lot of myths about fentanyl, that if you go into a fentanyl atmosphere where people have been smoking, you'll die. There have been empirical studies that have shown no measurable fentanyl in anyone's blood that goes into a smoky atmosphere. Now, that's not to say that we still don't do bloodborne pathogen and inhalant protocols at the police department. We do. So if you don't know what's in there, don't go in. If you don't know what it is, don't touch it. Don't move it. If you want to know what it is, put your gloves on, put a mask on, collect it, seal it, and send it to the lab. We used to, many years ago, do field testing. It's not worth your life. Your first question, you don't know where fentanyl is now. It is so ubiquitous in our society and so prevalent in everything. You don't know if it's been laced in that joint you're smoking. You don't know if it's in the gummy. You don't know if it's in the cocaine you're getting. You don't know if it's in the heroin. And most often, substance use disorders, the folks that are suffering from these, they're polydrug users. So it'll be, weed and alcohol or meth and heroin or meth and fentanyl. Meth is a stimulant. Even MDMA, methylene dioxyl methamphetamine, it's only one hydrogen ion off of meth. It does the same thing to you, ecstasy, MDMA, does the same thing that meth does to you. It just takes longer. But we're even seeing in the party scene now at these raves, they're putting fentanyl in ecstasy. In fact, we had a case over in Saratoga where 2 individuals died because they thought that they were snorting cocaine, and it was not cocaine, it was fentanyl. So I don't know the answers to how to combat this, because this is a community problem. This is a strategic partnership problem. This is literally a global problem, because it's not coming from our shores. It's coming from overseas. It's coming into Mexico, and it's coming across our southwest border. And again, that is far above my pay grade, and the far bigger brains than I are working on this problem. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Chip, I appreciate you putting this presentation together with the help of T. Brown and all the men and women that work for our police station, our police department. Taking this real serious. I took your challenge to heart, and about if I knew anybody who has been affected by this, and it took me like 0.01 seconds to know the answer to that, because 17 years ago, almost to the day, I stopped talking to my own mom because of this. We gave her a choice one day on whether or not I was personally going to pay for her treatment, and she told me no, and I've not talked to my mom since. And so not only does this affect people who die from it, it affects people who is still alive, but it tears families apart. I have three kids that don't know their grandma. My wife has met my mom, and for about 5 years was in her life, and then hasn't been since. My aunts and uncles don't talk to my mom. My grandparents don't talk to my mom. So this is a big challenge, and it's something that I've spoke out against for years and years and years, and I want to kind of just mirror what you said. I don't have an answer for it either, because it is a global problem that we should be addressing a little more than we probably are in some cases. But your challenge hit pretty much to home. I had to step out in the hallway because of it, just because something like this does hit pretty hard, tearing families apart and the damage that does to people. So I appreciate everything you guys do at the police department to kind of fix this, and I know fix is a wrong word, but the training that you guys go through, I appreciate all that, so thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? My question is, what about treatment? So as we encounter these people that are users and maybe not higher up the chain, what is the potential to get them into treatment when they want treatment?
That's a great question, because education, prevention, and treatment are always better and always less destructive. We're law enforcement. We're the gatekeepers. We are the individuals. We're the first person that is oftentimes intaking these individuals into the system, and we're not completely trained for that. We're not abuse counselors. We're not medical specialists. We're law enforcers. But as with everything with law enforcement, almost everything we deal with on a call is potential conflict and confrontation. We try not to make it worse. In fact, we try to make it better. And you can't always do that with these issues. But education, I can't say it enough. Education at all levels, prevention and treatment are much better alternatives. But that funding comes from our state legislature or from Washington, D.C. We have no treatment centers here. We have no intake facilities. There's nights at the emergency department and IMH when I've seen almost every bay full, not with overdoses, but you've got one or two people with overdoses and maybe somebody who's struggling with alcoholism. You might have a car accident victim. But law enforcement is the first, well, the family is the first to deal with it, but they don't have the resources, the training, the support. It's a global problem. It's a global response. And in our community, we need strategic partnerships. I would love to see a multidisciplinary team approach to this, to identify those at risk, to get them into a program to where they can get the treatment. I've talked to addicts that they're like, I'm waiting for a bed. I'm waiting to go to a counselor, or it's going to be 4 months before I can go here. They can't wait that long, as well as the cost. Nothing in medicine is cheap. But, what's the cost of a human life? What's the value? What's the worth? That's what we need to ask ourselves. And I've seen these people who have beaten this, and they were some of the most horrible individuals to deal with at the time. And they go from, I'm going to use a Lord of the Rings analogy, but they go from being Gollum to Legolas. They've gotten out of it. They're thankful. They're appreciative. And they're unrecognizable. It's like, wow, you're the person I found face down in the gutter 2 years ago. And that's the best part of my job. To have somebody who was throwing excrement on me and wishing me death to give me a hug and saying thank you. I don't know where we would get this funding. I know the Biden administration has signed legislation to open the gates for that. But again, I'm a field agent. I'm not a policymaker, and thankfully they don't give me too many big decisions to make anyways.
Vice Mayor, to add to what Officer Cirillo mentioned, we do have an opioid settlement, some opioid settlement funds that I know the city manager has mentioned in the past. She has convened a group of experts. I believe we're meeting later this week to further discuss some of the areas that we can spend those funds. And Commissioner Gosar is also part of that group. And he's recommended, I believe, some treatment options. We're also working closely with the VOA. They recently received some funding in our building. I believe it's a 56-bed facility in Cheyenne. I think it's a $3.5 million project. If I remember correctly, my numbers are possibly off. So there is some help on the horizon. Unfortunately, when you see issues like fentanyl hit the nation so fast, it's hard for us to respond in kind. And oftentimes, as Councilmember Newman mentioned, it really takes an addict to hit rock bottom before they're willing to change. And sometimes that's separation from family members. It's going through a major incident such as receiving a Narcan exposure to live. It can be something as a deterrent by being incarcerated. So there's multiple approaches to make individuals change their behavior and hopefully seek help. But at the end of the day, it's that person's responsibility to want to change. And that's a very, very difficult concept, I think, for many members of the community to understand. Councilmember.
Just because you said my name, sometimes they don't hit rock bottom either, and that's the problem. And then my mom's been incarcerated. She's had ultimatums, hit for theft to kind of feed this habit and whatnot, and her habit's more than just fentanyl, it's meth and everything else, because it's more like a gateway drug kind of per se too, if they don't die from it. So sometimes they don't hit rock bottom, and just sitting here thinking about 17 years without my mom kind of sucks. And the life I could have had kind of, I moved out of my house at 16 because this was a problem. So the effect and whatnot that this does have on people is real. So like I said, I appreciate everything you guys do to kind of stop this.
Councilor Richardson.
I understand that it sounds like there are dollars to start kind of thinking about addressing this more largely, and thinking about the dollars that we allocated toward the mental health piece and that we over-allocated what you thought you would need. Mental health and addiction are very closely tied together. And so I'm just curious if there would be a possibility of, if there are unspent dollars, spending those to do some sort of education. I know it takes a lot of money to really get a good campaign out there, but if we're really focusing it on the city, on Laramie, perhaps there's an opportunity to utilize, if there are any unspent dollars, some of those dollars towards some sort of an educational campaign.
Well, ma'am, if I may, I have given presentations to school teachers in our school district on fentanyl, symptoms, signs, toxicity, everything else. That's free of charge. That is free to all citizens, all groups. So, and we do that's part of the value-added service of the police department and DCI. But yes, I think that there should be a coherent campaign, like, the meth billboards that we used to have up. We had one on North 3rd and everything else. A lot of people talked about those. That had a lot of visibility. But I believe that some kind of formal education is a good place to start.
And again, to piggyback off what Officer Cirillo said, we actually have an opioid/fentanyl page on our website going live this week to coincide with this presentation. Chip's presentation will be part of that webpage. We've had one of our newer city employees, Owen, working on that, and I got the draft yesterday. We also have intended to use our social media to broadcast some flyers out, which he's working on both the city social media and the police department social media. So we are looking at doing a multi-prong approach to make sure that we're educating our community as much as we can on the city side.
Councilor O'Doherty.
I'd like to see the educational material. I thankfully live in a bubble, not a bubble away from opioids, the whole world, but this fentanyl, I haven't encountered it. I wouldn't know it if, well, now I have a blue pill in mind, but I would like to know what to be on the lookout for as far as patches, because I'm a person who digs out recycling out of trash cans, probably a bad idea. So, or like what somebody would look like. I mean, should we all be carrying Narcan, for example, even if I'm living in, okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, I'll answer that, ma'am. I want to put your mind at ease. We are overwhelmingly safe community. I know this sounds kind of doom and gloomish and like there's fentanyl zombies running around town. There's not. But things to look for. The first is, the little blue, the M30s. Foilies. If you see or you suspect somebody who's using fentanyl, there's lethargy, heavily lidded eyes, very sleepy. They've got burns on their mouth from using the smoking tubes. They've gotten too close to it. The foilies themselves, it's probably about 2 to 3 inches by 2 to 3 inches squares that have on one side, it'll almost look like a burnt barbecue sauce on it, which is where the pill was being vaporized by the heat of the flame underneath it and being chased around while they smoke the fumes off of it. And then the underside of that is going to just show the standard smoky charring from a lighter held close to it. With opioids, you also have issues with, it's a vasoconstrictor, and people might start using laxatives. Wound care, wounds take longer to heal, so they're using a lot of Band-Aids and whatnot. Some of the stuff that we've been seeing from the eastern seaboard with xylazine, it's a drug called tranq. So it's the fentanyl and xylazine together, both very toxic loads, and it's called tranq, and they have what's called the tranq walk. It's almost a zombie-like walk, or the people will stand there very stooped over, knees bent, their hands almost dragging on the ground, and just sleep like that or stand like that. Another issue that they've been seeing with this is massive suppurating sores on their body that take 2 to 3 months to heal. And again, I mean, our medical system can be overwhelmed easily just with some kind of mass casualty event. Just imagine this kind of thing happening in a major metropolitan area every day, and trying to get them not only clean but healthy. And they don't always have the healthiest lifestyle. But things to look at here in our community are things like that. The listlessness, the sleepiness, the heavily lidded eyes, burns around the mouth, maybe on the fingers, disheveled appearance. They don't care about anything anymore. And the things in the trash, foilies and smoking tubes. And the smoking tubes can be a pen that's cut down. One end of the pen is melted or charred from getting too close to the hot metal on the foilie. And then you'll see some darkened residue on it. So those are some things to look for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Cirillo, for your presentation. And I appreciate the information that you gave us and just the idea about how terribly addictive the fentanyl is, which then motivates drug traffickers to begin to lace everything.
Yes, ma'am.
The fentanyl, with the full intention of creating dependency upon the unintentional now addict. That
yes, ma'am.
We have a drug culture where people use it more recreational drug use. And I think the idea of fentanyl being laced into everything really creates quite a conundrum for how to deal with it. Because you have hardcore addicts that are going to take as much as they can take and still stumble down the sidewalk. But you have these unintentional people who are using recreationally, and as you said, Officer Cirillo, 5 times, 4 times? It depends
That's all,
on,
yes, ma'am.
yeah, what your
It could even take one
metabolism
time.
is. And you can have a problem. And I think that we really need to look at how we work with both populations, the unintentional, the person who gets into it without intending to, and what do we do with them, and the person, the hardcore addict, and that's a much harder thing to take care of. But
And
the,
what,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, like it was said earlier, that mental health and substance abuse issues go hand in hand, because this is changing brain chemistry. If you're predisposed to some mental health issues, it exacerbates it. We see early onset dementia in those who are genetically predicated to it with high dosages of just THC. So yes, we have a culture that accepts some levels of risk using these. What frightens me is if this gets into our youth population, because when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof and you'll never die. And it only takes one. It only takes one, puff of something that's laced with something for it to change your life, whether it's just, you get a drug charge and it affects your college career or your professional career, or ends your life.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I just have one other question. When
Sure.
we have individuals who are addicted and are incarcerated, I'm just curious what we do for them when they are in the jail and they are addicted and going through withdrawals. Do we have medical withdrawal available to addicted individuals who may be incarcerated in the jail?
I can speak to that. I was a sheriff's deputy. I was an extension deputy and sheriff's deputy before I switched over to the police department. The jail does a drug screening, and they have a panel of questions they ask. They have medical staff on the payroll that also address their needs. They'll ask the individuals if they have any pre-existing conditions, any existing maladies at the moment, any what they're addicted to. And there's medications like Suboxone, which they call subbies. They're sublingual. They look like, I don't know if you remember the old Listerine breath strips you could put under your tongue and it'd melt. It's a sublingual little sheet, and they can get on Suboxone and different things like that. But I don't know. I think the sheriff could answer that much more deeply for you. But I think they do a good job there of doing the initial intake and screening and making sure that those individuals are taken care of, because we have a duty under the Constitution. Once someone is taken into custody, we have a duty to care. It's not we have discretion. We have a duty to care for them. As soon as those cuffs go on, no more harm can come to them. Again, like I said earlier, we don't always make it better for them, but we try not to make it worse.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I was going to, so no further questions here. Are there any comments from the public? Is there anyone online? Seeing none, no further comments, then we'll close this topic. Thank you very much for the presentations. Very informative, very disturbing, but motivating to do something and to think about it. City Council updates.
The Laramie Advisory Council on Disabilities met on Thursday, and Scott Hunter, our Parks guy, talked about opportunities for funding for a fully inclusive playground. I believe Optimus Park, maybe trying to get that at Optimus Park and finding funding, and the council moved to provide a letter of support to help him get funding with that Conservation and Water Board or something. Is that the right board? Land Water Conservation Board, thank you. And did I get the right park? Is it Optimist? Okay. And then several people came to the Freedom Has a Birthday table and raised the issue that accessibility into the paved areas of the park is difficult, or knowing where, how to get up to the paved areas. And Scott was listening to that and trying to find solutions. And then public comment about it would be nice to have a map of ADA parking spaces around town. Maybe we could even have an app for that. So those are some of the things they addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pierce?
Yeah, yesterday, the Albany County Emergency Management Group met, which is an amazing group of people, like I've said before, from our own city staff to county to folks from power companies and all different agencies were there. The presentation was on fire and our probability of, forest fires and stuff like that. And I guess my takeaway, not being even close to having a whole lot of knowledge or expertise in this field, just because we've had rain, it doesn't make it any less likely that we won't have fire. So it just extends the growth, and things dry out, and wind, and all sorts of things. So that was my takeaway, if that matters.
Councilor Pierce, I'm just wondering if they addressed, after the fire in Louisville, you wonder how vulnerable are we as a city? Did they look at that, or?
I think they probably have. I haven't been with this group long enough to get a presentation related to that. But the county, and Janine, you can help me out, but the county has a whole emergency management group. This is basically run by the county, and we just get invited. And from the city side of things, Brooks Webb was there, and I'm going to forget someone, and I apologize, but Brooks Webb was there related to infrastructure issues. Our fire chief was there. I think, Chief Brown, you may have had a representative there. Were you there? But you had a representative there. So we had a lot of different departments represented, along with Highway Patrol, county. So it's pretty darn amazing. And then folks from public health. Wow. Right? Mm-hmm. So Dr. Elias was there, and two other staff people. So it's a pretty well-oiled machine. I'm not going to say nothing's going to happen because it's so well-oiled, but they really are pretty amazing and expert in a pretty wide variety of areas. And they, from the Fed Department of, probably it would be Bureau of, maybe under the Bureau of Land Management. Yeah, I don't know. He was there talking about some prescribed burns that they had in different areas, and they cover a huge amount of ground, for looking at all these different fire issues or fire potential.
Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't really answer your question, but you got more information.
I was just wondering if it was part of the discussion, but what you added was very interesting. Thank you. Councilor Newman.
Just wanted to update on the youth council. We have started the interviewing process to pick that, the council for the next school years. Council members Shumway and Councilwoman Richardson and myself and city staff set through an interview today. We got 4 more tomorrow. And then a shameless plug, if you guys know anybody, have them apply, because we still have a couple open positions. So something to look at.
Excuse me.
Work session.
Time's up.
It's time to go. Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so that was my update.
Okay. And
My only update is a big thank you to the curmudgeons for constructing the parklet at 2nd and Ivinson. Took advantage of that during Jubilee days, and it's very nice. Thank you.
We also took advantage and went in, got sandwiches and sat out there, and it was wonderful. So, and Councilor Somerville, do you have anything to report?
Vice Mayor, just real briefly, some of the folks from a town gown group met today to discuss how to start the process of making that group more effective, looking at structure and maybe subcommittees and things along those lines. I think that'll be a good discussion over the months to come. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you. And I just want to support, yes.
I was just curious if I could ask Councilor Somerville who is on that committee for clarification. I can't remember who's all involved with that.
Councilor Gabriel, so the town gown group is the city, and so for today's meeting, Janine was there, and Todd participates, and then I'm there, and Vice Mayor Cumby was there today. So the city, the county, the University of Wyoming, LCCC, and Wyotech is what makes up the town gown group.
Thank you.
It's a big group.
Councilor Pierce, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a big group.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on Councilor O'Doherty's remark about, we had several people come up to the table and talk about how a map of ADA parking, and we got a letter, very informative letter from Denise Greller. And I think it's something for us to think about. I think it would be very community friendly, and for us even to, I like the idea of an app and then possibly a map that people would have so that they know where these spots are. And there was a suggestion that it would make going downtown easier if you would know. So, okay. So the last thing, the agenda review. And are there any comments or suggestions?
It looks good to me.
Councilor Shumway?
I noticed a couple of items on forming the Police Advisory Commission. If this gets too deep and there's too much for us just for the council meeting, maybe we could postpone or else do a work session to do the bylaws and the formation and all of that. It seems like, it may go smoothly or it may get into deeper discussions. It's a short agenda, but I think that'll take up the bulk of the time.
I think so too, and it could get very involved.
Maybe we can just postpone or do a work session.
Maybe remove the last item before it and then see how far we get.
So move 16 up. 14. And 14 would be 15, 15, 16.
If I,
As far as we get, right?
City manager?
Mayor, to that issue, and then I had another addition to the agenda that I just learned about before I got here. Sorry, clerk. Anyway, on that issue, if we do become involved in a significant revision of those bylaws, I think council want to keep in mind that may trigger revisiting the ordinance as well, because the two are tied together in many ways. And this is why we almost always, I don't know why we didn't in this case, but why we almost always adopt third reading of the ordinance and the bylaws in the same evening. They certainly can be changed, but there's a lot of overlap. So if we start changing those, we may have to reopen the ordinance as well. Just heads up on that. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you is I was under the impression that the resolution to support the Dallin Ditch diversion project had been pushed off to the first meeting in August. I was wrong, and I learned that about an hour ago. So if it would be okay with the council, I'd love to add the resolution to this agenda a week from today to, all you would be doing is approving the level 2 study, which is through all of the public process now. It's being finalized, and your resolution to approve that green lights us to start preparing an application for level 3 funding and bring back a resolution to you in probably late August to get your authorization to submit that application. So if that's okay, I'd love to add that.
And then you'll add that
Above
the advisory activities. Okay.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Then we are finished for the night. Thank you.